There are a lot of things that you don't want to find growing out of the ground, especially when you're trying to maintain a cemetery. Hi, I'm here to bring you the scariest stories that the internet has to offer. And today we're talking about the garden that grows in graves. Do you ever wonder what might be hiding in the overgrown areas of your local graveyard? I know I do. It's impossible not to wonder. There's something inherently creepy about cemeteries. There are so many human remains buried beneath the surface. You can just sense it everywhere around you. Even if you're in the nicest cemetery, surrounded by manicured lawns and rows of headstones, there's still an unsettling feeling there because of what's beneath your feet. So today, we're diving into the graveyards, looking at the flowers that grow from the dead. Our next tale is going to take us back to a time where death was even more feared than it already is now. Back before modern medicine was available and most diseases would kill you or horribly disfigure you, people had a great fear of all illness if you were unfortunate enough to contract leprosy, tuberculosis, the plague, or any number of other illnesses. Well, you were basically screwed. In most cases, these illnesses were transmitted through the air, meaning that you could easily catch one just by being around someone who was sick. In order to avoid contagion, lepers were quarantined and isolated even from their own families. But it wasn't only people who were subjected to this kind of treatment. If clothing or bedding belonging to someone who was ill was abandoned somewhere, it was often burned immediately so that no one would come across it. This particular story takes place during the Middle Ages in England. The narrator is an unnamed man who was visiting his family home when he came across a strange sight. He saw a beautiful flower blooming right outside the house and decided to pick it up and smell it. As soon as he did, he felt some stinging pain, and when he pulled his hand away from the flower, he saw blood where his skin had been in contact with it. He immediately realized that he had touched a cursed flower and began to run inside for help. Unfortunately for him, the flower had already begun to take hold, and he soon found himself covered in sores and wounds. He was whisked off to a hospital where he spent 40 days while everyone waited for him to either die or recover. After 40 days, his wounds were gone and he was left totally cured. When he went to thank the hospital staff for their aid, they told him that he wasn't supposed to be alive. Basically, the disease that had struck him was a death sentence. However, the mysterious flower had also worked as an antidote to its own curse. So really, he owed his life to that flower. This is a pretty messed up situation. Imagine surviving a deadly disease, but only to find out that you owe your life to your own impending doom. What a predicament, and what a scary thing to have to live with for the rest of his life. That's one hell of a plot twist. Another similar story comes to us from the Italian author Giovanni Boccaccio, who wrote a story that seems to have very similar vibes to the last one. In his story, a young girl named Fiammetta was tending to her garden when she came across a strange rose bush. She didn't recognize it and decided to pick a rose to try and figure out what kind of plant it was. After picking the rose, she smelled it and immediately collapsed. She was taken to a hospital where once again she remained for 40 days until she recovered. And then she heard rumors that the people who had nursed her back to health had never seen anyone survive that sickness. Again, this story seems to imply that the rose cured her of the sickness, but why? Why does it seem like these flowers only work as antidotes when they're touching your skin? Why aren't people just eating them and curing themselves right away? I think there's something a little deeper going on here. These plants aren't just dangerous and magical, they have something to prove. Maybe they're trying to send us a message. This brings us to our final story today, which will take us over to Japan, where a man named Ishikawa Hakushu was walking home after a long day when he came across a path he didn't remember seeing before. It was overgrown with weeds and vines and appeared to lead straight to his house. He walked down it, finding it strangely familiar, despite having no memory of it before. And when he arrived at his house, he noticed that it looked different than it normally did. He opened the door and entered, noticing how dusty everything was. He called out to his wife, but there was no reply. He wandered through the house until he finally came across a bedroom where his wife was lying in bed asleep. He woke her up and she told him that she hadn't seen him all day. He learned that he had actually been missing for 3 years. After spending some time with his wife, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to see how much things had changed. To his surprise, he noticed that nothing had changed at all. The stores were exactly the same as they had been 3 years prior. He visited some old friends, but they didn't remember him at all. They introduced themselves to him as if they had never met before. It turns out that the 3 years that Ishikawa had spent wandering around the overgrown path had only amounted to 3 seconds in the real world. When he went back to the path that had led him home, he found that it had completely disappeared. This story is a crazy trip, but it's also kind of sad. I feel bad for the guy, because it sounds like he was kind of stuck in this weird pocket dimension between reality. It's kind of depressing to imagine that. Thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on these stories? Let me know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you next time.